Hello everyone, my name is Mario Tiazzo and I'm the Data Analysis and Visualization Librarian here at UNB Libraries. Today we're going to take a look at how to analyze the PISA data using crosstabs. We'll take a look at two ways to construct crosstabs in Excel. The first is by using formulas and the second is by creating a pivot table. First, let's take a minute to examine what is a crosstab. A crosstab, which is short for cross-tabulation, is a table that examines the relationship between two or more categorical variables. The table is organized in a matrix format and allows for easy comparison between the desired variables. Okay, before we start analyzing the data, let's pick two categorical variables in the PISA dataset. I'm using the Hong Kong 2022 dataset here. For this example, let's grab the gender variable in column T and the immigration status variable in column W. So I'll go to the top of column T, Control-Shift down to grab the entire data series, Control-C to copy. I'll go to another sheet, Control-V to paste. I'll do the same for column W, Control-Shift down, Control-C, next sheet, Control-V. Okay, we have our working data series and we are ready to start working with our data. Let's start by building our first crosstab table using formulas. The first thing that we need to figure out are the unique components within both data series. We can do this by using the unique formula. We'll go to an empty cell right here, press the equal sign, the name of the formula, unique, open the parenthesis, and for our data set, we'll pick the gender column to start. So go to the top of the gender column, Control-Shift down, close the parenthesis, and press enter. So there are only two responses for gender in this data series, 2 for male and 1 for female. Let's put a sort wrapper in front of the original formula so that the data is sorted. Go here, sort, open the parenthesis, go to the end of the formula and close the parenthesis. Great. Now let's do the same thing for the next data series. I'll go over here, equals, sort, unique, Control-Shift down, close the first parenthesis and close the second parenthesis, press enter. So there are 4 responses for immigration status in this data series. 1 for native student, 2 for second generation student, 3 for first generation student, and 9 for no response. Remember that I said that the crosstab table is a matrix. So let's use the transpose formula as a wrapper in front of the original formula to convert this output from being vertical to being horizontal. So I'll just go to the front here of the formula, type in the formula name, transpose, open the parenthesis, go to the end of the formula, close the parenthesis. Now we can lift up the output by 1 row and we have the shell of a crosstab table. Just lift this here. Great. All we have to do now is to fill it in. Essentially, we want to count how many instances in our data that a variable from a gender variable intersects with the immigration status variable. We can do this by using the COUNTIFs formula. We've already seen the COUNTIF formula, which counts something if it satisfies a criterion that we've established. So if we wanted to count how many native students were in the dataset, we can do this by using the COUNTIF formula. For example, equals COUNTIF, open the parenthesis, our dataset here, Control-Shift down. The criteria for native student is 1, so I'll just type in 1 here, close the parenthesis. So there are 3,190 people who responded that they were native students in our dataset. The COUNTIFs formula is basically the same framework, but it can handle multiple criteria. Let's fill out the cell F2. So we want students who have a 1 gender, so female, and a 1 immigration status, so native students. We can do this by going to the cell and pressing the equal sign, the name of the formula, COUNTIFs, open the parenthesis. This formula has 2 arguments, the range and the criteria, and then it repeats that sequence again and again. Let's choose the gender for our range. Let's press the comma to jump to the next argument, and let's click on E2, which is 1 for our criteria. Press comma again to jump to the next argument. This time, we'll select the immigration data as our range, comma for the next argument, which is a criteria. And this time, we'll select cell F1 or 1 for our criteria. Close the parenthesis, press enter. So there are 1,570 people who responded that they were both female students as well as being native students in our dataset. Now, we could repeat this to fill out the rest of the matrix, but I'm lazy, so I'm going to tweak my formula to be able to drag it out to the rest of the cells. I'm going to put absolute cell references on both pairs that deal with the original data because those data points aren't going to change. I'm going to press F4, F4 for the gender range, and F4 to lock in the immigration range. I'm going to put an absolute cell reference on the column or the letter of the gender criteria because it's always going to be E, so just a $sign. I'm also going to put an absolute cell reference on the row or number of the immigration criteria because it's always going to be 1. So I'm just going to go over here and press the $sign in front of the 1 to lock that in. Now I can drag this formula for the rest of the matrix and it should be correct for all entries. Drag it over here. And I'm going to drag it down over here. Let's double check here. Yep, the bottom right corner has both data sets still locked in, and it's referencing the 2 and a 9, which is correct. Let's double check this by calculating some totals. Remember, this COUNTIF formula was accounting for all native students, so this should return the same number once I'm done. Equals sum of these two. Yep, 3190, perfect. I'll drag this out. And I'll calculate the sum of the columns as well. And I'll drag this out. So my vertical grand total and my horizontal grand total both are 5907. And my data set has a count of 5907. So it all seems to work out. Great. Now we could be done here, but let's try to spruce it up a little bit and follow the APA table guidelines. For more background on this, I created a separate video that goes into this in more detail. So the first thing that is obvious is that if we were going to present this, we would need better tags to identify the elements within the variables. Our users may not know what gender 1 and 2 mean, for example. So let's make that more explicit. Let's insert 2 rows here. Right click, insert, down. Let's put native student, second generation, first generation, no response. Let's also increase the column widths to accommodate the text. And let's put a header tag on top here, immigration status. And instead of merging, which I don't tend to like to do, I'm just going to highlight the cells, right click, format cells, alignment. I'll go into this horizontal drop-down menu here and press center across selection. Press OK. Great. Now let's insert 2 columns here. Let's tag this female, male. Let's put gender at the very top here as the header. Now let's center justify the main area as well as our tag here. Great. Let's also tag total here. Total here. And let's quickly work on our numbers. Let's highlight the numbers, right click, format cell, number. We're going to use the 1000 separator and we're going to have 0 decimal points. Great. Let's add our border lines now. So put 1 at the very top of the table, 1 for a spanner header, 1 to delineate the actual body, 1 at the bottom of the table, and 1 for the total. Okay, it's starting to look good. Let's build the title and the headers. Let's add 6 more lines. Let's start by putting a title, something like this. Make sure to italicize it. And a header. Let's assume this is the first table, table 1. Bold that. Next, let's put the note. And let's make sure to italicize the note tag as well. Now, this may be redundant if you properly source your data in accompanying text, but since I'm not putting it right now, I'll keep it here, if only for my reference for later. Now, if we wanted to save this in some sort of document, we'd probably want to get rid of the grid lines. We have a few options here. We could either put a white background here, like so, which would remove the grid lines. I'll Control Z here. Or we could just simply go to the Page Layout tab and just click off the grid lines, and now they disappear. So from there, we could click on a snipping tool Now we've got a nice APA crosstab table that we can insert in our Word document or our PowerPoint presentation. Great, I'll copy that for now. I'll bring this back later. So we successfully built our first crosstab table. Let's look at another way to get the same result in case this method appeals to you more. This time we'll use a pivot table, which essentially is a way to distill complex data without using formulas. So let's go back to our original data set. When dealing with a bigger data set, especially if I'm going to be using it for pivot tables, I like to convert my data into an Excel table. To do so, I just press Control A to get all the data and then Control T to transform it into a table. It asks me if my data has headers, which it does, so I press OK. Having the data in a table format makes it easier for Excel to know what data you want to work with. Now that I have the table, I can name it here. Instead of table 2, I'll name it PISA 2022 HK for Hong Kong. Having my data in a table format has several advantages. First, you have the built-in freeze frame. So you'll notice my headers here. If I were going to go down on a regular Excel spreadsheet, I'd lose the headers as soon as I would scroll off the screen. But in this case, you can see that the headers remain because they're frozen at the very top, which is very handy when dealing with large data sets. It also has a filter option on all the columns. So if I wanted to sort by immigration status, for example, I could click here and say, I just want the non-responders. And I could click off everybody but the 9s, and only the 9s would show up here. And then I could clear and all my data would be returned as is. Finally, if this data set was dynamic, I could go to the very bottom here and include more data. You can see here, as soon as I type in something, I'll just replicate HKG here, a new row is included. So the data gets automatically integrated in the table. So if I have things linked to this table, I don't have to worry about updating the ranges in my formulas, which is very handy. I'll just Control Z here to get this off and go back to the top of the table. Great. So now that we have our table, we can create a pivot table. You simply go to the Insert tab, click on the pivot table icon in the ribbon. You can see that my PISA 2022 Hong Kong table has been automatically inserted, which is perfect. I could put my pivot table on the existing worksheet, but that would be cumbersome. So let's put it on a new worksheet. I'll press OK, and you can see here, sheet 4, we have a pivot table. Now what? Well, these are the seeds of the pivot table. On the left, you have what will ultimately become your pivot table, and on the right, you have the potential ingredients of your pivot table. Notice that they are all the fields in our original data. Below that, we have the filter, column, rows, and values. So let's try to recreate our first table using the pivot table. Let's put the immigration field in the column section. Go back down here, in the columns. So just simply drag it in. And you can see that the pivot table has already started to change. It's populated 1, 2, 3, 9. And then we put the gender in the rows. You can see 1 and 2 now are in the rows, which is perfect. And we'll put the gender again in the values. Great. Notice that the title says sum of gender, but we don't want the data to be summed. We don't want the 1s and 2s to be summed. We want them to be counted. So instead of sum here, we can go back to the values, click on the drop-down menu, value field, and instead of sum, we'll say count. Press OK. And now we have count of gender. Remember, I copied the first table that we worked on. Let's paste it now. And we can see that the numbers are exactly the same. They're just displayed a little bit differently, but they're exactly the same. So that works out well. Great. Let's leave that here for a reference. You'll notice that my right-hand table, or the ingredients of the pivot table, have disappeared. That's because I've clicked off of the pivot table. If I click back on here, they reappear. Additionally, if I go here to Pivot Table Analyze, I can always click them on and click them off by clicking on the Field List button, which is basically just an on-off toggle. Some of you, when you create your pivot table, might have field headers. I've automatically taken those off, but if they do appear and you want them off, you can just press the field header on-off here to remove them. Okay, let's update the text of our pivot table to make it look a little bit more like our original table. Here, we just overwrite native student, second generation, first generation, no response. And instead of grand total, put total. You'll notice that total changes both for the rows and the columns now automatically. Great. Here we can put female, male, here gender, immigration, cross tab of students. Great. Let's increase this a little bit. Let's center. And let's work on the numbers. Format cell, number, 1,000 separators and no decimals. That's looking pretty good. It's not an APA format, but it gives you an idea of how quickly you can create a crosstab table using pivot tables. Okay, I think that will do it for today. We were able to create crosstab tables using formulas and pivot tables. I hope that this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.